Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a constitutional law professor turned congressman and one of the sharpest legal minds on Capitol Hill, went toe-to-toe with Republican Representative Knott of North Carolina over a bill that would essentially blackmail states and cities into becoming extensions of the federal deportation machine. What followed was a masterclass in constitutional law versus political theater. Raskin, armed with Justice Alito's own words, yes, a conservative justice dismantled the legal foundation of this legislation piece by piece. And what did the other side offer in return? Hypotheticals.
Yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Georgia. As always, Ms. McBath is a woman after my own heart, because she goes right to the heart of the issue, which is the sovereignty, the integrity of our state and local governments under the constitutional system. Now, there are at least two unconstitutional features to this legislation. One is the one at issue in this amendment, which is the Godfather offer, saying that if the states and localities don't accept this dictate from on high by the federal government, then they will lose federal funding that comes from their tax dollars, along with the tax dollars of other American citizens. The other provision is the somewhat sneakier one, which purports to avoid this direct conflict with the 10th Amendment by establishing a right of state and local officials to participate in the administration of federal laws, which is very strange. Because after all, state and local employees report to state and local governments who pay their salaries, and yet this right is apparently unlimited. But in any event, we'll come to that one later. Ms. McBath says, obviously, under all the Supreme Court precedents, you've got to get rid of this Godfather offer because you can't do indirectly what you could not do directly. And I would really recommend that all of our colleagues who still care about Supreme Court case law and interpretation of the Constitution read Justice Alito's opinion in Murphy versus NCAA from 2018. And he points out that the legislative powers granted to Congress are sizable, but they're not unlimited. We are a body of defined enumerated powers, and all powers not expressly delegated to the Congress of the United States are reserved to the states and the people in the 10th Amendment. The anti-commandeering doctrine, writes Justice Alito, simply represents the recognition of this limit on congressional authority for people who are still interested in the original constitutional design. Well, what's the purpose behind the anti-commandeering doctrine? Justice Alito spells it out very finely. First, the rule serves as one of the Constitution's structural protections of liberty. The Constitution does not protect the sovereignty of the states for the benefit just of the states or state governments as abstract political entities. To the contrary, it divides authority between the federal government and the state governments for the protection of individual freedom, the liberty of the people. Second, the anti-commandeering rule promotes political accountability because the local and state officials are elected locally, and they must be responsible to the people, not responsible to Congress or federal bureaucrats who are controlling them. And third, Justice Alito says, the anti-commandeering principle prevents Congress from shifting the cost of federal regulation to the states and localities.
Will the gentleman yield?
By all means.
One of the questions I've got, and I appreciate your summary of the law, I disagree with pieces of it, but this bill is aiming to make it to prevent states from making it illegal from cooperating.
Yes.
Right? There's no compulsion. It just says you cannot decline enforcement. You cannot decline making it illegal to enforce. And as you well know, there are multiple examples of cross-jurisdictional assistances, whether it's drug enforcement, violent crime. So
well, and this is why, thank you, let me answer it, because the Alito decision in Murphy answers precisely your point, because that was the structure of the legislation that was issued there, where the federal law prohibited state authorization of sports gambling. The Congress said, we don't want you to authorize this practice. It's like the sanctuary law. We don't want you to authorize something we disagree with. And the Supreme Court said, even though it doesn't compel an affirmative act by the state or local government, you are interfering with state and local policy when you do that. So I think it will resolve your question completely when you read the Alito decision here. But in any event, that goes to the more subtle point, which we will come to in a moment. I've got something about the 10th Amendment directly. Ms. McBath's amendment is about the very clear point. Okay, so in the Brady Act case, the Congress said all of the sheriffs and local police officers and local government must participate in background checks. And the Supreme Court said you can't compel the state and local governments to use their time that way directly. It would be as if we said, oh, okay, we'll do it indirectly. If you don't accept that system, we're going to cut you off from federal funding. And that's exactly what this does. So
hypothetically, could a state say to a local sheriff, you cannot hand someone over pursuant to a federal detainer? Is that legal under the ranking member's theory?
Good question.
What the states and localities can do is control the conduct of their own officers. And the federal government has the power to enforce the immigration law however it wants. It's got hundreds of billions of dollars. It can do it however it wants.
So you think that the state can make it illegal for a sheriff to hand over an illegal alien?
No, I don't know that any of them are structured that way. But in any event, what they can say is state and local government have the power to control the time and the conduct and the behavior of their employees.
Appreciate the indulgence.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's exactly what they've done in 11 states, what you just described, what the gentleman from North Carolina just described. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
What you just witnessed was not simply a procedural disagreement between two members of Congress. Representative Jamie Raskin, a man who spent decades teaching constitutional law before he ever set foot on the House floor, did something remarkably effective. He took the words of Justice Samuel Alito, one of the most conservative justices to sit on the Supreme Court in modern history, and turned them into the most devastating argument against this Republican-backed bill. Representative Knott, to his credit, engaged. He asked questions. But notice what he did not do. He did not refute the constitutional argument. He did not cite a single case. He did not offer a legal framework of his own. Instead, he offered hypotheticals, what-ifs, and could a state do this, which is the legislative equivalent of changing the subject when you're losing the argument. That the bill merely prevents states from blocking cooperation with federal immigration authorities. That sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Until you remember that the Supreme Court of the United States has already addressed this exact structure in Murphy v. NCAA and said no. You cannot dress up federal coercion in the language of permission and pretend it's something else. Whether you call it a mandate or a prohibition, when the federal government dictates what states can and cannot do with their own employees, their own resources, and their own policy priorities, that is commandeering. This bill contains what Raskin so aptly called the Godfather offer: comply or lose your federal funding. Funding, I might add, that comes from the tax dollars of the very citizens living in those states and cities. This is not governance, this is leverage. This is Washington saying to New York, to Chicago, to Los Angeles, to every city and state that dares to set its own law enforcement priorities, fall in line or we will starve you financially. The same political movement that spent decades rallying under the banner of states' rights, that built its entire judicial philosophy around the 10th Amendment, that told us government closest to the people governs best, that same movement is now telling states and cities they have no right to decide how their own police officers spend their time. The hypocrisy is not subtle, it is structural. It was not a liberal justice who wrote the opinion in Murphy v. NCAA. It was Samuel Alito. It was not a Democratic administration that championed the anti-commandeering doctrine for decades. It was the conservative legal establishment. What Raskin did today was simply hold them to their own words. And apparently, that was enough to leave the other side, reaching for hypotheticals. So where does this leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads that is becoming disturbingly familiar in American politics. On one side, there are those who believe the Constitution means what it says, that federalism is not a slogan, that the separation of powers is not a suggestion, and that the rights of states and localities are not conditional upon their political alignment with whoever happens to occupy the White House. On the other side, there are those who are willing to rewrite the rules every time the rules become inconvenient. 11 states have already enacted sanctuary protections. 11 states have already said, we will decide how our resources are used, and we will not become an arm of federal immigration enforcement. This bill seeks to punish them for that choice, not through persuasion, not through negotiation, through financial coercion.